Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Welcome back to my Create an RPG series. In this episode, we will be going back to our status effects once more, and this time it will probably be the last time we return to enhance it with functionality. So, starting off, let's open up our status effect blueprint base class. Now, what we want to do is we want to do exactly the same thing we did in the last episode. We want to add functionality when it comes to tags, but we want to do it for our attribute system now. So if you remember our attribute system, we have some functionality available to change an attribute. Let's see if we open it up here. We have some public methods like change attribute, which takes some input like a tag, a value change, an attribute type to change, and an origin. What we want to do is hook up into this functionality with our status effect, because remember, our status effect is essentially a positive or negative effect that is either temporary or permanent that somehow affects your character, right? And this could be something like a poison that does damage like we have done before. It could be something that gives it a property like we did with the poison, but could be like burning or chilled or anything like that. But also it could be something like a buff to your strength, for example. Maybe you get +9 strength as long as you have a certain ring on, or maybe you get -2 intellect for 5 minutes because some enemy put a status effect debuff on you or such. So that is the functionality we wanted to build into our status effects now, and we're going to be doing that using a new structure. So let's go into status effects and create a structure. We find it on the blueprints and structure. We call it S underscore, and we call it attribute change, like so. And then we open it up. So the straightforward parts that we want to do is the first one. We want to have a gameplay tag as a type. This will be the actual attribute that we want to change. So we call this attribute to change. We add another variable. This one will be a enumerator of we called it attribute attribute context. No, what did we call it? E attributes. It's probably this one, right? Let us check to make sure. So if we go back to our third person character, we go to the RPG folder attributes, E attributes. Yeah, so this represents the different attribute types that we could change, right? So that's correct. So that's the one that we want to have here. In addition to that, we want to add a new variable. Also, we need to name this, of course. Let's call it change type. And lastly, we want to have a float. This will represent the value we will change with. So we'll call this power multiplier. And the reason we call it power multiplier will become apparent in a moment now, because we will be adding a last one here, which will be a float curve. And there we go, curve float. This is so that we can actually have the ability to have like we have when we leveled up, we had certain points where we would get like what kind of experience we would need to level up. The same way we might want to have different strengths of status effects, meaning they would affect us differently. Maybe you have a, let's say you have a status effect called imbue strength, and level 1 maybe gives you +5 strength, but level 2 gives you maybe +10 strength. So the power multiplier will be of that, and it will also be working together with this float curve. So we will name this scaling curve, for example, like so. And let's see, we created a curve in our XP widget called C level, which is essentially just using these values here, and this will be fine for us. We can have that as a default, or you can create a new one, of course, if you want to. But just so we have a curve to make use of here. By default, we want to have some value here, power multiplier, I think, so we at least have some value. So let's say that we have 1 as the default. can close this down. And we can go back to our, we can close down the BPC attributes as well and go back to our blueprint for status effects. So just like how we adding tags before, we will now add another variable which will contain these different types of changes. So we will be creating something, and let's call it attribute effects. And we'll make it of a type of S attribute change is what we called it. Like so. And we'll make it of an array so we can have multiples if we want to. So we could change, like, for example, strength and intelligence if we wanted in the same status effect. Now that we have that, we need to get essentially the same thing as we did with tags. We want to add it when we start with the status effect, and we want to remove it when we end with the status effect. So we will make some space for these, and we'll create our first function. The first function we can call apply attribute effects, like so. And having that open now, what we want to do is essentially take our attribute effects and set them, and then work through all of them. So if we have defined multiples of them, we'll just loop through each of them, like so. And what we want to do with each of these is we want to take the attribute element here and we want to break it. And now we want to make use of this to actually change our attribute, right? So first of all, we need to get owner. And from owner, we need to get component by class. Now we could do this in the loop here, making sure that we did it all the time. However, it feels a bit unnecessary to do the same thing multiple times if we, let's say, have 10 different array elements there that we want to change. We don't need to do the get owner, get the component class, and then do something each time. We could instead do something here saying that, first of all, let's choose the correct one here. So we need to choose the blueprint component that is for attributes. Once we have that chosen, we can drag out from it and say valid. And this way we can check now in the beginning here, if we have a valid attribute component, then it's interesting for us to go through this. Otherwise, we don't have a component to add it to, right? So only if it's valid, we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to return. Okay, so now that we have this, we need to drag off this component over here. We'll type in reroute, so we have a reroute over here. And now we want to change the attribute. So we know this is valid, so we can just go attribute change. That's not how we spell attributes. Like so, change attribute. All right. And each loop we will go into here. And what we will be sending in is a tag, and we'll get that from here. We have a change type, we'll use that one here. We have a power multiplier, which could be used here, but remember we want to have this scaling by our curve, if it's like of different power levels. So let's say we have a power level of 1 by default. So we can add a variable saying level. This will represent the status effect level. We'll make it of the type integer, and we'll make it a single one. And actually, let's make it a float so we don't have any conversions and such. So using our level, we can drag it out, and we can say get float value. So we will get a point on the curve representing the level, which is the level curve like we did earlier. And then the value from this will be a value we can then multiply with our multiplier, for example. So if we do it like so, we multiply float by float, and that's how we change the value. So the value here will be changed by partly what level we have on the status effect, partly what is assigned in the curve, and then also with the power multiplier. So you have 3 different things that could affect your total output from this. So you have 3 different things you can essentially tweak. In addition to that, we can also make a origin and we get not self, we want to get owner. We'll send that one in. Again, if this is the owner, actor, and controller you want to send as an origin, depends a little bit on your preferences. Get instigator controller. It depends a little bit how you want to have your system built. Hopefully, I have described it well enough for you to know how you want to change it, if you want to change it differently from how I have it, of course. Because again, we're building a framework foundation here. It's supposed to be sort of flexible for everyone's needs, but regardless of that, you will need to extend the systems to fit your needs, of course. And that might be like having completely different variables in structures, or having slightly different variables sent into existing structures, or having different methods, or having the flow work a little bit different. It might be completely varied depending on your needs. But yeah, so now we have created essentially the ability to go through all of our abilities or ability changes and then add them to our attribute system. And then we return from here because we're done in this function essentially. Now, we can go back to our graph here and we can say that we want to now apply our attribute effects like this and say like, this is what we're supposed to do. And it will now go through all of our attribute effects that we assign, if we assign any, and add them to the character. Now we want to remove them. However, we know that we are essentially going to be doing the same thing as we're doing when we're applying our attribute effects. So what we can do is actually change that function a little bit. So what we can do is we can add an input saying, make it a Boolean and call it, I don't know, maybe add effects. And this will then be driving us, telling us if we're going to be adding them or removing them. So we add a branch, we just have it like so we get two different executions. Then from here, we can have a local variable. Since we only need it inside of here, we'll call it local multiplier, let's say. And there we go. And if we then set it in these two different situations, we can say that in the top one, we're going to be adding effects. So we can have a multiplier of 1, meaning it will just multiply what we have. And in the other one, we can have -1, meaning it will negate whatever we had before. Then we can just join these two flows together again, and we will resume whatever that we had before. We do need to add, though, a little bit in the end here, because now we have the final value here, but this needs to be multiplied now by what our local multiplier is, like so. And this way we now have the function doing both of the things for the different flows, essentially, just being driven by one flag. So we go back to our event graph. We see now that we can click in add effects over here, and that one should be adding it. And we can do the same over here. We apply attribute effects and say false on it, adding of effects, and this should be removing the effects now. So that should be all we need for this functionality. So now we can test this out, and we should be able to do something with our stats. However, we only have one stat so far, so we will be playing around with our health. So let's go to, first of all, actually, let's clean this up a bit. We made this attribute change inside of Statuseffect because we were making use of it here. However, attribute change sort of feels like it belongs to attributes, so we will actually move it over there instead. And then we will right click on, actually we will save first, and right click and fix up redirectors in case it needed to do that. And now we will create a status effect. Let's compile this also. So we'll create the status effect, a blueprint, and say temporary hit point loss, for example. So inside of this status effect, we can now create some functionality. So let's say we go and say we want to have the one attribute change effect here. We say we want to change the attribute of health, and we want to change the base value, and we want to change it by a value of, let's say, 10, and we say that the level is 1. That's a bit weird. It should have been 1 by default. I think we set that, didn't we? No, we set the power multiplier to 1. Let's set the default level also to 1, because a level of 0 doesn't make sense in a lot of cases, although you might want to have it like that in your game. Anyway, so now we have a level of 1. Level 1, if we open up, let's find the curve, have that open. We know that a value of 1 is over here, level 1. It has a value of 0, so it would have a value of 0 times the multiplier and also the level. So it gets 0, multiplies it by the power multiplier, which multiplies it by the local multiplier. So regardless of what we're putting here, we're going to be getting 0. Then we go into our third-person character and actually add this. We can now rewrite, because we've run out of keys, we're now doomed. So we'll reuse the number 9 key, which had the status effect for poison, and we'll change this to BP 10 loss, was what we called it. So we should be adding the status effect to ourselves now when we press 9. Since this should give us 0 in change, we shouldn't be seeing any change in our hit point. So I press 9, nothing seems to be happening, and status effect is removed, so it's over, nothing happened. So that's working as expected, although maybe not as we want it. So let's go into our status effect now and change our level to 2, which means level 2 here has a value of let's see, 150. That might be a little much. Let's say, let's go to our status temporary here and change the multiplier to maybe 0.1. Okay, 0.1 multiplier times the value here, which is 150, should mean that we lose 15 hit points temporarily then. So let's see if that works. And we press 9. And nothing happens. Okay, so something's wrong. We get to debug what is the problem. A good place to start would of course be to go to our stats effect, and where we're actually adding this attribute effect. So let's put a breakpoint here and run and press 9. We'll step into it. We'll step over. We are supposed to be adding it. We're checking if it's valid. We're stepping out. We ended up in a standard macro. Close that. No, we can't. We know that we have an attribute effect here to change of 1. So we'll move over here. We get in the standard macro again. We'll step out. We'll get here, we can see that our power multiplier, we can actually not see that. Do we get our last value? Yes, we do. So we're supposed to change it by 15. Okay, so here is the problem most likely. We are changing the value by 15, which in this case is a positive number, meaning that our hit points will likely go up to 15 above the max, and then it will be reduced by 15 again. So in this case, since we are making an effect that's supposed to be losing us life temporarily, let's make it a minus 0.1. Compile, and we run again, and we make it large, we press 9. All right, that will bring us, sorry, we have the breakpoints, so it will get a bit of an issue. Let's do it this way. This is the fastest way, I think. No, not, there we go. And there we go. And we remove it, and we resume it, and you can see that the hit points have been reduced in the health bar, and there it returns. So what this essentially accomplishes then is, as long as we have this buff or debuff, it will have its effect on us. That's what this start effect does. And whenever it ends, it will remove whatever effect it had on us. So if it was a positive effect, it removes the positive effect in the end. If it was a negative effect, it will remove the negative effect in the end. And yeah, and so regardless of what effect you have, it will expire once the status effect expires. And you could also have like maybe some abilities will cut this short and say that it will cleanse you of all status effects, so it will call on all end status effects on all the status effects that you have currently that are maybe like negative or something like that. And then they will immediately remove those negative effects here and clear the timers, and everything like that will be cleaned up properly. Or you might want to have something like, and these are just suggestions of ways you could possibly do it. You could have something like, these status effects are all now driven by time. In case you want to have them also be applied to things like that are more permanent or conditional, like say for example you have a ring that had like gives you strength as long as you're wearing it, then you would maybe have, you could change this logic from saying if we send in a time that has a duration of 0, we don't set this end timer, for example, so you don't actually get to the end state. And then when you equip this ring, you call on this status effect then, which has a timer of 0, and then you don't get the end, so you get this strength effect applied here in the attributes sort of semi-permanently until you unequip it. And then the unequipping of the ring then would have to make sure that the status effect's end status effect gets called, so the effect of the strength enhancement is gone. So those are just some ways you can tweak this further, but already now you can see that we have a very powerful system because we can communicate with our attributes and give us temporary or permanent buffs or debuffs. We can communicate with our property system, giving us certain tags that will be possible to read from other systems to give us certain effects or behavior being run, like event driven. And we also have the base template here in itself, which allows you to do things like hook it up to periodic effects and have things happen in the beginning or the end, or having checks here check that you have enough mana to do something, or anything that you want to achieve essentially. Anyway, I think this is a good place to stop for now, so I hope to see you in the next episode. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.